Hello, in this video we're taking a look at the anxiety iceberg, and you might be thinking, what is an anxiety iceberg? Well, what it means is that when you have anxiety, whether it's driving, flying or any other kind, it goes a lot deeper than you think. So it's like an iceberg, the way you can see about 10% of it above the water, but about 90% of it is hidden beneath the water. I'm going to give you an example in this video of how to fix driving anxiety, and I do want to point out, although this is a fictitious case, it's one I've made up, it's very similar to how this works in real life, because I've worked with hundreds of people all over the world online to help them overcome anxiety, and this is exactly how it works. And I'm going to explain why things often don't work. Like, for example, the first point I like to make about driving anxiety is, as you'll know if you've watched my other videos, it's not about driving. I always say this, driving anxiety has nothing to do with driving, because what most people get wrong is, if we move on to the first point, this is the problem people may come to me with. I can't drive at high speed due to panic attacks. So this is common, and it doesn't matter whether it's you can't drive at high speed or whether you can't drive on bridges or you panic when you're in traffic. It doesn't matter what this is, because the problem isn't the problem anyway. It doesn't even matter if it's not driving, it could be flying, needles, public speaking, it may not even be anxiety, it could be something else. The problem isn't the problem. And this is why, if you go to a driving instructor, you're never going to fix driving anxiety with a driving instructor, unless it's me, of course, because if you don't know, I'm both a driving anxiety hypnotherapist and I've been a driving instructor for 20 plus years, and that's why I do this. Now, one thing I like to quickly point out about this is people do sometimes say, well, if driving anxiety has nothing to do with driving, why do I need a driving anxiety specialist? I've answered that question in other videos, and I'll put a link to that in the description, and I'll link it at the end of this one. But first of all, before we go any further, I'd like to explain what I mean when I say that the answer won't make any sense, because I'm now going to reveal what the cause of this fictitious client's problem was. Now, some people will say, oh, well, it must be something to do with driving. It has to be that there is an old memory of driving. No, it's nothing to do with driving or cars. That is the trigger. That's what sets the problem off. It's not what the problem is. And most people by far will go to instructors and people like that, and they'll get stuck here. And the iceberg goes deeper and deeper and deeper down to here. This is what I mean by the anxiety iceberg. But most people get stuck at this, which is the conscious level. They get stuck with, it's driving lessons, I need to do exposure therapy, which will never work because you're not working on the right thing. Exposure therapy works on this, the conscious stuff. What I do with hypnosis and other things goes much deeper, right down here to the bottom of the iceberg. So you're wasting your time with driving instructors who go out driving and talking about driving and rules of the road and blah blah blah, conscious thoughts. They mean well, but they haven't got a clue what they're doing, because they don't understand this as I do. So what do you think the cause of this client's driving anxiety was? Now, of course, you've got no idea, and this is the point. The client has no idea, and this is why people get stuck with anxiety. So the cause of their problem was a toy dinosaur. Now, you're probably thinking, what? How can a toy dinosaur have anything to do with driving anxiety? Well, this is where people go wrong, because you see, at the moment, this doesn't make sense, does it? This is a bit like, and I often compare my work to being a detective and solving murder mysteries. If you know who the killer is at the beginning of the story, it not only spoils the story, But it won't make any sense, because how could that link to this? How does a toy dinosaur link to a fear of driving at speed? How would that person have done the murder? It won't make sense. But the thing is, when we fill in these spaces and steps, it will make sense. So you see, if you're fixing a fear of driving with all this logical stuff at the top here, this is the top of the iceberg, you will get nowhere. So let me explain how a toy dinosaur had caused the problem and how we got to that conclusion. So what we do first of all is we started talking about the problem, and if you do it in the correct way, not just idle chit chat, if you're trained in how the mind works and you know what to say and what to look for, it brings up feelings. So this very often happens, although this is a fictitious, made up client, this is not a real case I'm talking about. This is exactly the same thing that actually happens in real cases. So we talked about the problem, and the client was saying to me, my stomach starts hurting. It's just like I've got this pain in my stomach. Now, if you know how to do this, you'll know how to grow that feeling. And what people do wrong is, like driving instructors and badly trained therapists and whatever, maybe even doctors who aren't trained in the mind but the body, they'll say, oh, are you okay? Or, go and do this and have a drink and just take a rest and just, it doesn't matter. They're bringing you away from the solution, because whereas I understand we need to go into this deeper, and unfortunately that can mean making your stomach hurt more and crying more, they drag you up and away, whereas I want to dive in to the iceberg. So I hope you can already see now how people who say it has to be to do with driving, you're wrong, it must be to do with driving. No. So let's move on to the next step. What happened next? Well, we used a hypnotic regression which brought up a memory from a school sports day. So a hypnotic regression is when you take people back in their mind. They don't really go back in time, although they kind of do. That's a long story, but quite simply, your mind has no concept of time. So when you take people back in hypnosis, it's powerful. It's just like being there. And some people even hallucinate, and they can see and hear and feel things that happened years ago. And it's very powerful. It's probably the most powerful way of overcoming an anxiety, fear or phobia. And they had a memory of a school sports day. And again, although this is not a real client I'm talking about, this often comes up. School sports days often come up. I'm going to put a picture up on the screen now of me doing the sack race at school on my school sports day. So there's me hopping along in my sack, and I used to absolutely hate doing that. And it's a very common thing that comes up for many people. Why? Because it can be embarrassing, and you've got your parents there cheering you on. It can be very embarrassing, and it can leave a mark on you. Not for me, but I do remember one of my teachers reading us a story before we did that, about how it's not about the winning, it's the taking part, all that kind of stuff. Don't worry if you lose, it's the taking part that counts. And did you know, I'm not going to name it, but there is a very famous person who once read a story to their child. I think they were ill and they had to have an operation, so they read them a story about some dwarves, quite a famous story about some dwarfs and a princess, and that was hypnosis, because they guided them into hypnosis so they weren't worried about the operation. Anyway, let's keep this on track. So where do we go from there? So you see how we've gone from driving at high speed to the stomach hurting and the memory of a school sports day. Well, next, that leads to other memories. So they had other things come up in their mind, which can be, for example, about this, a toy dinosaur. So one of the other memories was, a memory comes up of when they once broke a toy dinosaur. They were running around the house and they trod on a favourite toy dinosaur. and they were very upset about that, and they cried, and it meant a lot to them because it was their favourite toy. Now, this is where people go wrong. People say, this is rubbish. How can stepping on a dinosaur and breaking it possibly lead to anxiety? Because, as we said earlier, your mind has no concept of time. So if this upset you and you weren't allowed to grieve the dinosaur as such, let's say your parents were saying, oh, just, it's just a dinosaur, stop crying, just get over it. You may have repressed that feeling. Now, yes, it means nothing now, because to an adult, of course, stepping on a toy dinosaur doesn't matter, right? It just doesn't matter. But as a child, you don't view things the same way. Your child mind may have seen that as a massive thing. You might have been really upset and sad and cried about it. And the thing is, the child you, what we call the inner child is still within all of us. We all have this child version of us, which is why people get things like road rage, because without knowing it, they're slipping into their unconscious and they're in a way reliving some anger from childhood. That's why some people get road rage, because without knowing it, they're reliving an old event. So the next step is emotion from that is released, as we just said, and no longer comes out when they drive. So you see, when they go driving, the high speed and the panic attacks were all because this emotion was trapped. Now we've released it, they might still think of it subconsciously. You won't know this, that's the whole point. You won't have any idea this is going on. But this is the emotion that's coming out when you drive. And people say it makes no sense. I've been driving for years. Why did I suddenly start getting panic attacks and crying and being terrified? It's because of your toy dinosaur. And I would like to point out a very important point. This method of using regression to find an old memory is not the solution for everyone. This will only work if your mind chooses to share the memory with you, and you don't always get to know what it is. But I had a session yesterday with a client, and it was incredible, and afterwards it didn't dawn on me until about 2 hours after the session, and I thought, hold on a minute, I've got it, I know why that happened. I wonder if they're going to email me. I wonder if the client has come to the same conclusion I have that links all this together. But this will only happen if your mind chooses to show you. There are other ways that you can fix this, and you need to know all of them to be an effective therapist, but they do all kind of link together. And people quite rightly ask, why would that cause driving anxiety? Well, you see, one thing this person had forgotten, again I'm making this up for this video, but this is exactly the kind of thing that happens with real clients. A forgotten detail about this is that just around the time their anxiety began, they put a new air freshener in the car. You get those ones that dangle down from the mirror, and the air freshener was in the shape of a dinosaur. So their mind had seen that, and they'd re-fired up this old memory of this from childhood. So do you see how deep that goes? Look where we've gone from I can't drive at high speed due to panic attacks, and the instructors and people who don't know what they're doing saying, oh, you just need to expose yourself to it. How would that exposing yourself to it ever lead to a dinosaur? Well, it wouldn't, because he's got nothing to do with it. How would talking about it with an instructor and you start crying and the instructor says, oh, it's okay, do you want to leave the lesson till next week? Just go and lie down. No. You've just dragged them right away from the solution because they don't understand this. Talking about it made the stomach hurt. They cried. We used that emotion to enter hypnotic regression, which brought up a memory from school sports day, which led to them treading on a toy dinosaur, which released the emotion which their inner child no longer feels, and it was triggered by the air freshener they'd forgotten about, which they would never have thought about if you weren't for doing a hypnotic regression. Do you see how far these people are up here? It's about driving anxiety. Take my driving course, expose yourself to driving. They are miles away from the truth and they don't know what they're doing. Check out these other videos of mine on the screen now for more help, and if you'd like to work with me one-to-one online from anywhere in the world, contact me through my website firstdrive.com. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you again soon for more videos.